I was standing at my kitchen sink with both hands wet and soapy when Brianna screamed it. "Get out." "No." Her voice hit the walls and bounced back at me like something thrown hard. I turned slowly, water still dripping from my fingers, and looked at her standing in the middle of my kitchen like she owned every inch of it. Behind her, my son Daniel leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed and a smile on his face. Not a nervous smile. A proud one. He started clapping. Slowly. Deliberately. "That's right, honey. Finally someone put her in." He never finished that sentence. Because I turned to face him fully, and I said something so quiet and so certain that the smile dropped off his face before I even reached the end of it. The kitchen went completely silent. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I looked at my son and said, "I'll leave the kitchen. But before you celebrate, you might want to read the fine print on what happens next." Brianna laughed. A short, sharp sound. Daniel shook his head the way he used to when he was 16 and thought I was being dramatic. Neither of them asked what I meant. They were too confident for that. They stood in my kitchen like two people who had already won something, already decided how the story ended. That was when something settled inside me. Not anger. Clarity. Because in that moment I realized they genuinely believed this house was theirs. Not borrowed. Not a favor. Theirs. And they had believed it for long enough that they had stopped being careful about hiding it. That was their mistake. It had started 14 months earlier, on a Thursday evening in September. Daniel called and said he had lost his job. His voice was tight and controlled the way it always got when he needed something, but didn't want to admit it. Brianna had just found out she was expecting, he said. They needed somewhere stable while they sorted themselves out. "Just a few months, Mom," he said. "We just need a landing place." I said yes the same night. I gave them the master bedroom because it had the bigger closet and the attached bathroom, and I thought that mattered for a pregnant woman. I moved my own things into the guest room at the end of the hall without being asked. I told myself it was what mothers do. I believed that for a long time. The rearranging started small. Brianna moved the couch one afternoon while I was at my neighbor Paulette's house. When I came home, the living room looked different, and she explained it got better light that way. I said nothing. Then she started buying different groceries and pushing mine to the back of the refrigerator. Then she began locking the pantry cabinet where she kept what she called our food. One Saturday morning, I went to make breakfast and reached for my nonstick pan, the one I had owned for 11 years, the one my late husband Gareth had bought me for my birthday. It wasn't there. I found it in a box in the garage. "Those are for family use," Brianna said when I asked. I reorganized. She said the word family the way someone says it when they have already decided who belongs inside it. I waited until Brianna was out one afternoon, and I pulled Daniel aside in the hallway. I told him calmly what had been happening. The pantry lock. My cookware in the garage. The way Brianna spoke to me in my own home like I was an inconvenience she was tolerating. Daniel listened with his eyes slightly down and his jaw tight. Then he exhaled. "Mom," he said, "you're making things tense." I stood there and let those words land. He didn't say Brianna was wrong. He didn't say he would talk to her or that things would change. He just looked at me with that patient, tired expression like I was the one creating a problem that hadn't existed before I opened my mouth. That was the moment I understood. He had already chosen. Long before this conversation. After that, I watched more carefully. Brianna began hosting dinners on Friday nights. Her mother. Her two sisters. Their husbands and children filling up my living room and eating food cooked on my stove and drinking from my glasses. Nobody introduced me as the owner of the house. I was simply Daniel's mother, mentioned briefly, and then moved past like a footnote. I paid the electricity bill those evenings. I paid the gas, the water. Every comfort they enjoyed in that house came out of my account every single month. And through all of it, Daniel kept saying the same thing whenever I hinted that the arrangement felt permanent. "We're not going anywhere, Mom." Not as a reassurance. As a statement of fact. Almost a warning. Like he knew something I didn't. Like he was certain that no matter what I said, His position was safe. That night after the kitchen incident, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the narrow guest room bed that had become mine and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I got up, went to the small desk in the corner, and opened the bottom drawer. The folder was exactly where I had left it 3 years ago, tucked behind a stack of old utility records. I pulled it out and spread the papers on the desk under the lamp. The house deed. My name, only my name, printed clearly at the top. And behind it, a second document that I had almost forgotten existed. A clause my lawyer had helped me draft quietly in the months after Gareth passed away, when I was thinking more carefully about the future than anyone around me realized. I read it slowly twice, and then I sat back in my chair. After Gareth died, his brother had suggested I transfer the house into a shared family trust to protect it for everyone. He had made it sound generous. Logical. My lawyer at the time, a steady woman named Faye, had leaned forward and said very plainly, "Never transfer full ownership. Not to anyone. Not even family." I had listened to her. Daniel's name was never added to the deed. Not during the good years when things between us were easy, and not during the 14 months he had been living inside these walls. He had never asked directly. I think because he assumed it was already settled somehow, that time and presence had given him a kind of ownership that didn't need paperwork. But there was something else in that folder. Something beyond the deed. Something Faye had helped me add specifically for situations like this one. Every utility account connected to the house was in my name. The electricity, the gas, the internet, the water. All of it billed to me, paid by me, renewed under my name every year without exception. I had kept it that way not out of suspicion, but out of habit. Gareth had always said keep the practical things tidy. I had followed that advice long after he was gone. What I learned from Faye, and what I confirmed again that night reading her notes in the folder, was that Daniel and Brianna had no lease. No rental agreement. No written arrangement of any kind that established them as legal tenants. They had moved in on a verbal agreement between a mother and her son, which meant legally they were guests. And guests, unlike tenants, have no automatic right to remain. The weight of that fact sat in the quiet room with me. I sat at that desk until nearly 4 in the morning. My hands were not shaking from fear. I want to be clear about that. They were shaking the way hands do when something you have been holding back for a very long time finally gets permission to move. I had spent 14 months making myself smaller in my own home, moving around Brianna's moods like furniture she had rearranged, watching my son look through me at dinner, sleeping in a guest room while they used my bedroom, my kitchen, my electricity, my peace. I had told myself it was temporary. I had told myself family required sacrifice. I had told myself things would settle. But they had not settled. They had solidified. What started as a favor had become an assumption. And tonight, in my own kitchen, they had applauded my humiliation. I was done asking for respect I should never have had to ask for. Tomorrow I would stop asking entirely. I called Faye at 8:30 the next morning. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and my folder, and I told her everything. Not emotionally. I laid out the facts the same way she had always taught me to. Dates, incidents, the notice I had received in my own kitchen the night before. Faye listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a short pause on her end of the line. "You have been more than generous," she said. "More than the law required and more than they deserved. If you're ready, it's time." She asked me a few clarifying questions. Was there a lease? No. Had I accepted any rent payments? No. Were the utilities in their names? No. She told me what document she would prepare and what timeline was realistic. I told her to go ahead. I felt steadier after I hung up than I had felt in over a year. Faye emailed me the document by mid-morning. I read it carefully, made sure every detail was correct, then walked to the printer in the hallway and printed 2 copies on plain white paper. It was a formal notice of required vacancy. 30 days. Lawful, clear, and drafted on Faye's official firm letterhead with her contact information printed at the bottom. I found Brianna in the living room folding laundry. I walked over and held out the notice without a word. She took it the way you take something from someone you don't really expect to matter. She was already forming a dismissive expression before she looked down. Then she saw the letterhead. She read the first paragraph, then the second. The folded shirt in her other hand dropped slowly onto the cushion beside her. Her expression didn't collapse all at once. It changed the way light changes when a cloud moves across it. Daniel was in the kitchen when Brianna found him. I stood near the hallway and listened as she pushed the notice into his hands. I heard the paper rustle. Then silence. He read it twice. I counted the seconds. Then he walked out to where I was standing, holding the document at his side, and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face in a very long time. Uncertainty. Mom. His voice had changed. The ease was gone from it. This isn't funny. I know, I said. It's not meant to be. He looked down at the letterhead again, at Faye's name and the firm's address, as if he was hoping it would turn into something else if he stared long enough. For the first time in 14 months, he had no quick answer. No patient sigh. No gentle suggestion that I was the one making things difficult. He just stood there, looking uncertain. Brianna recovered faster than Daniel did. By that afternoon, she had convinced herself it wasn't real, or if it was real, it didn't apply to them, or if it applied to them, it wouldn't hold. She came and found me in the guest room where I was reading and stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. You can't just do this, she said. We live here. We have a baby coming. You can't throw a pregnant woman out of her home. I looked up from my book. This is not your home, I said. Not unkindly. Just accurately. You stay here because I allowed it. That is the whole of your arrangement with this house. Her face reddened. We have rights, she said. I nodded slowly. You're welcome to look into that. She stood in the doorway a moment longer, as if waiting for me to soften. I turned back to my page. 2 days later, Brianna announced she had called a lawyer. She said it at dinner loudly, with the satisfaction of someone playing a card they had been holding all afternoon. Daniel looked up from his plate. I reached for the salt. Good, I said. That's the right thing to do. You deserve accurate information. She hadn't expected that response. She had expected me to panic, I think. To backtrack or apologize or suddenly find a reason to let the 30 days stretch into 60, and then 90 the way all the other uncomfortable things had stretched. I did not panic, because I had called Faye 3 days before Brianna called anyone. The paperwork was already filed. The legal position was already confirmed. Faye had walked me through every possible counterargument and what the actual law said about each one. I already knew exactly what Brianna's lawyer was going to tell her. I just waited for her to find out herself. The change happened on a Thursday. I noticed it in the morning. Brianna came downstairs and moved through the kitchen quietly, without the easy authority she had carried for months. She made her coffee and took it to the living room without rearranging anything or opening the pantry cabinet she had locked. No one was coming for dinner that Friday. She didn't mention it, and neither did I. Daniel told me that evening, with his eyes on the floor, that they had spoken with a lawyer. He didn't say what the lawyer told them. He didn't need to. The way he said it, flat and careful, told me everything. They had no claim. No tenancy rights. No legal foothold of any kind. The notice was valid. The 30 days were real. The house had always been mine. They had simply forgotten that, or decided it didn't matter. Now someone outside the family had explained that it did. Daniel tried one more time. He came to the guest room on a Sunday evening and knocked before entering, which he hadn't done in months. He sat in the small chair by the window and looked at me for a long moment before he spoke. After everything you said about family, he started. After everything we've been through, you'd actually throw us out. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The tiredness around his eyes. The way he held his shoulders. I'm not throwing you out, Daniel, I said. I gave you a home when you needed one. I gave you my bedroom. I gave you my time and my utilities and my patience for 14 months. I paused. You decided that wasn't a gift. You decided it was just yours. And when I stood in my own kitchen last week, you clapped. He opened his mouth. That's not me throwing you out, I said. That's a consequence. On the 26th day of the 30, Brianna hosted one final dinner. She invited her sisters and her mother again. I heard them arrive from the guest room, the door opening, the familiar voices filling the hallway, music playing in the living room, dishes clattering in my kitchen. I lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling and understood exactly what this was. It was defiance. One last performance. A way of proving to herself that she still had control over the space, that the notice hadn't taken anything away yet, that the 30 days hadn't expired. I didn't go downstairs and argue. I didn't stand in the kitchen doorway and make a scene. Instead, I picked up my phone and made a quiet call. Not to Faye this time. To the civil enforcement office that Faye had already contacted on my behalf 2 days earlier, asking them to be available on day 31. Day 31 was a Tuesday. I was in the kitchen making tea when the knock came at 8:45 in the morning. Brianna got to the door before I did. She opened it with the confidence she had been reassembling over the past few days, convinced, I think, that I would not actually follow through. The man at the door was calm and polite. He wore a plain jacket and carried a document with official stamps across the top. He introduced himself and explained his purpose. He handed Brianna the enforcement notice. She stood in the doorway reading it for a long time. I watched from the kitchen entrance, my hands wrapped around my warm mug, as the color drained slowly from her face. She had believed until that exact moment that there would be a softening. A last-minute change of heart. That I would blink first. I had not blinked. The 2 hours that followed were loud. Brianna moved through the house fast and sharp, pulling things from shelves, stuffing bags without folding anything. Daniel followed behind her, quieter, slower, like a man walking through water. At one point, I heard Brianna's voice crack through the wall. "This is your fault. You said she wouldn't do anything. You said she didn't have the nerve." Then Daniel's voice, lower, harder to hear. "I didn't think. You never think. You just assumed and now look at us." I stood in the kitchen and let them work it out. The alliance that had felt so solid in that room when they stood together and applauded, the shared confidence that had let them treat my home like theirs for 14 months, was fracturing under the weight of an outcome they had convinced each other could never happen. Daniel came to find me alone while Brianna was loading the car. He stood in the kitchen doorway, not the way he had stood there with Brianna the night she screamed, but smaller, quieter, his hands hanging at his sides. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it," he said. I put my mug down on the counter and looked at him. "I know," I said. "I thought you were just—" He stopped. Started again. "I didn't think you had it in you." Those words should have stung more than they did. But I had spent enough of the past year being underestimated that I had developed a kind of immunity to it. "You thought my love meant I had no limits," I said. "But love without limits isn't love. It's just surrender." He looked at the floor. "I should have said something to her," he said quietly. "When it started. I should have said something." We stood in the kitchen for a little while longer. I didn't rush him. I wasn't trying to punish him by drawing it out. I just let the silence exist because some things need space around them before they become real. "I love you," I said finally. "That hasn't changed and it won't. But I will not live like I lived this past year. Not for anyone." Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't try to explain Brianna's behavior or make a case for staying or suggest I was being harder than the situation required. He just nodded. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was talking to my actual son, not the version of him that Brianna's presence had slowly replaced. He looked tired and young and genuinely sorry. But sorry is a beginning, not an ending. And we were not at the ending yet. By noon, they were done. The car was packed. Brianna carried the last bag out without looking at me. She walked through the front hallway with her eyes straight ahead and went out through the door she had treated like her own for over a year. Daniel stopped at the door. He looked at me. His eyes were red at the edges. I didn't reach for him and I didn't turn away. I held his gaze steadily and let him look at me as long as he needed to. He nodded once. Then he went out. I stood at the window and watched the car pull away from the curb and move slowly down the street until it turned the corner and was gone. The house was quiet. Not empty. Just quiet. The specific and particular quiet of a space that has been returned to the person it belongs to. I didn't rush to reclaim anything. I didn't immediately move back into the master bedroom or throw open the pantry cabinet Brianna had locked. I just walked through the house slowly, room by room, the way you walk through a place after a long time away. The living room. The hallway. The kitchen. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer beside the stove, the one I kept pens and small useful things in, and something caught my eye. A folded piece of paper, tucked under a takeout menu like it had been placed there carefully and on purpose. My name was on the outside, written in Daniel's handwriting. I stood at the counter for a moment before I opened it. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street. A bird called from somewhere in the yard. The refrigerator hummed steadily in the corner. I unfolded the paper. It was not a long note. Daniel had never been someone who said things in many words when a few would do. Asterisk, I'm sorry I forgot whose home this was. I'm sorry I forgot who you are. I watched you get smaller and smaller, and I told myself you were fine. That wasn't love. I know that now. I hope one day you'll let me show you I remember. Asterisk. I read it twice. Then I folded it along its original crease and held it in both hands. I did not cry, though I had expected to. What I felt was more complicated than sadness and quieter than relief. It was the specific feeling of something that has been bent for a long time finally being allowed to straighten. I had not lost my son. I had just made the kind of decision that was going to determine what came next for both of us. I set the note on the counter, put the kettle on, and stood in my kitchen. Mine again. Still mine. Always mine. I had not won by being loud or cruel or fast. I had won the way I had always done the things that mattered most. Quietly. Carefully. And without ever once backing down.